Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolutely fascinating concept from an ancient text that literally frames the entire span of a human life, not just as some random series of events, but as a deliberate, ongoing harvest. It's all about how our deepest internal intentions ultimately shape our eternal realities.
So ask yourself for a second, what are you harvesting today? Or I guess a better way to put it is, what seeds are you actually planting right now? Look, in our fast-paced modern world, it is incredibly easy to get totally swept up in immediate gratification, right? We all want the quick win, the instant reward, the harvest we can consume today. But the textual framework we're analyzing today challenges that mindset head-on. It really forces us to stop and ask whether our daily actions are just throwing down seeds for tomorrow, or if we're cultivating something much, much more profound for the long haul. This brings us to the core metaphor, straight from our source material, specifically Surah Ashura, verse 42:20. The text presents this really fascinating, stark dichotomy. It says that if a fleeting, worldly harvest is all you desire, well, you might get a portion of it right now. But, and this is a massive caveat, you'll have absolutely no share in the afterlife. On the flip side, for the person who desires the future harvest of the life to come, the text promises their harvest will actually be granted an increase. It's this profound philosophical look at delayed gratification versus immediate consumption. Section 1. A framework for living. So how do we actually cultivate this? Let's break down the first 3 steps of this harvest of the heart framework. Step 1 is literally the foundation. You have to cultivate a deep desire for the hereafter over the present. Notice how that starts entirely within the mind and the heart. Then, step 2 builds on this by orienting your life towards God to fulfill that internal desire, which the text essentially defines as the core of religion. And then step 3 translates that inner orientation into outward action, learning to believe and do great good things. The text makes it super clear that an internal, long-term desire is the absolute prerequisite for any outward positive action. Basically, you can't have the external harvest without planting the internal seed first. Now, what's really interesting about how this framework evolves is the incredible psychological insight you see in step 4. It suggests that learning to love people is actually the engine that drives us to do good. It completely connects our external output to human empathy. Then, step 5 turns right back inward, focusing on identifying good and guidance by looking inside ourselves for answers. This is the intuition piece, which is huge. Finally, step 6 brings the whole shebang together by communicating with God through our hearts. The structure here is just beautiful. It weaves back and forth between our internal state, our connection with humanity, and our relationship with the divine. Section 2. The power of kinship. This brings us to a really powerful point in verse 42:23. The text asserts that inviting others to this path of goodness is driven purely by a totally selfless love for humanity. It says, "I do not ask of you any reward for it, except love of kinship." What this does is frame spiritual leadership not as some sort of transaction for personal gain or worldly power, but as a genuine act of familial human love. You're doing it simply because you care deeply about the people around you and their ultimate harvest. Continuing with that exact same verse, the text goes on to explain the actual mechanics of this harvest. It states, "Whoever earns a good deed, God increases its good. God is most forgiving, most appreciative." And wow, it's fascinating how the divine is framed here, isn't it? Not just as some strict ultimate judge, but as appreciative. Good deeds are basically viewed as these tiny seeds that the divine acknowledges, forgives the imperfections of, and then actively multiplies. It's a real multiplier effect. Section 3. The inner compass. So let's slow down for a second, because this brings us back to that brilliant premise from step 5, intuition. The source material suggests that we humans inherently possess this internal compass. We don't always have to look to external forces to figure out what's good or to find guidance. The framework argues that we can literally look inside ourselves for the answers. It's like we all come factory-equipped with a built-in moral GPS system designed to navigate right from wrong long before modern psychology ever came up with terms for our inner conscience. And we see this concept of intuition directly supported by verse 42:24, which states, "He has full knowledge of what is in men's hearts." The text doesn't just view the heart as a biological organ pumping blood. It treats it as the ultimate seat of absolute truth. Think about it. You might be able to mask your intentions from the outside world. You might even be able to trick yourself for a little while. But according to this source material, the true, unfiltered nature of your seeds and desires is fully known to the divine because it resides deep, deep within your heart. Furthermore, the text takes a really firm stance on the ultimate victory of truth over human lies, noting that falsehood is wiped out and truth is vindicated by his words.
But there's also a very stark warning here. The verse notes that individuals might accuse the messenger of inventing lies about God, and it responds by stating that if God so willed, he could seal your heart. That implies that this amazing internal compass we just talked about, it can actually be shut off or sealed if someone persistently leans into falsehood. It really highlights the incredibly high stakes of maintaining an honest internal state.
Section 4. The Final Reaping.
All of this builds to the starkest contrast in the entire text, which we find in verses 42:21 and 42:22. On one side, we have the wrongdoers, who essentially laid down a religion without permission. The text describes them as fearful of the inescapable consequences of their deeds, ultimately facing a painful punishment. Then, on the opposing side, we have the believers, who did righteous deeds. For them, the text paints a picture of absolute supreme favor, describing them as being in the meadows of the garden where they shall have whatever they desire from their Lord. It is a definitive, completely uncompromising look at the text's perspective on ultimate divine justice versus supreme divine favor. So, what does this all mean for us? Let's quickly summarize our key takeaways. First, life is metaphorically and structurally a harvest. You literally reap what you sow. Second, as that 6-point framework showed us, our external actions have to be deeply rooted in our internal belief and our love for humanity. Third, the heart is the ultimate inner compass that holds the true answers to our intentions. And finally, the reaping, whether it turns out to be the fleeting, temporary gains of this world or the multiplied supreme favor of the hereafter, is entirely inescapable. Which leaves us with one final thought. We've explored the structure, the psychology, and the absolute consequences laid out in this ancient framework. The source material is telling us that the truth of your harvest is already sitting right inside you. So, if your heart genuinely holds the answers, what seeds are you choosing to water right now? Think about that as you go about the rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep seeking understanding, and I'll catch you next time.